Welcome to an Echo of the Past channel. I am Mary Stuart, Queen of Scotland, a woman whose life was one great tragedy of love, betrayal, and lost hopes. Today I'm going to tell you my story, the story of how I was born a queen in the cradle, but died a prisoner on the scaffold. A story of the love that destroyed me, the trust that betrayed me, and the hope that never left me. I am Mary, and I was born on 8 December 1542 at Linlithgow Palace as the only legitimate child of King James I of Scotland. When I was just 6 days old, my father died, heartbroken by defeat at the hands of the English, and perhaps also in grief at the political chaos in the country. Imagine the irony. I became queen before I could walk, a little infant on the throne of a powerful kingdom, surrounded by predatory nobles who wanted to rule in my stead. My mother, Marie de Guise, a French noblewoman, became regent and fought for my survival every day. Henry VIII of England wanted me to marry his son Edward and thus unite Scotland with England forever. When my mother refused, the rough courtship began, a brutal war where English armies burned Scottish towns and murdered innocent people, all for the sake of a little baby, me. At the age of 5, I had to leave my country. My mother sent me to France, where I was supposed to be safe. I remember that boat journey, a little girl watching the Scottish coastline recede, not knowing she would see it until 13 years later. In France, I was accepted as my own daughter. King Henry II and Queen Catherine de' Medici treated me with affection. But even in that golden French court, I felt I was a foreigner, a Scottish queen without a kingdom. In France, I grew up as a true Renaissance princess. I spoke French as my first language, danced, played the lute, wrote poetry. I was tall, almost 6 feet, with amber hair and pale skin. They called me the most beautiful princess in Europe. But the most important thing was that I fell in love. Francis, the Dauphin of France, had been my best friend since childhood. We grew up together, played together, dreamed together. Our love was pure, innocent, true, something I've never experienced in my life. In 1558, when I was 15, we were married in Notre Dame Cathedral. It was the most beautiful wedding of the century. Me in a white dress studded with pearls, Francis in a gold doublet. All of Paris celebrated our love. When Francis came to the throne as Francis II, I became Queen of France. I was 18 years old and the queen of 2 kingdoms, Scotland and France. I also claimed the English throne because I thought Elizabeth I was illegitimate. I wore the royal insignia of 3 countries. It was the happiest time of my life. Francis and I planned for the future, talked about children, how we would rule justly and wisely. I believed our story would have a happy ending. How naive I was. Happiness is as fragile as a glass vase. One blow of fate and it breaks into 1,000 shards. December 5th, 1560, the day my world collapsed. Francis suddenly fell ill with an ear infection that spread to his brain. I watched my beloved husband die in agony and could do nothing. He died in my arms. He was only 16 years old. At 18, I was a widow. Catherine de' Medici, Francis's mother, suddenly turned cold towards me. I was no longer useful to the French crown. I was a liability. She made it clear that I was not welcome in France. I was faced with the most difficult decision of my life. I could stay in France as a helpless widow, or I could return to Scotland, which I had left as a child. I chose courage, to return home and rule my people. August 19th, 1561, the day I returned to Scotland. When I landed in Leith, a mist fell over me, as if the land was saying, "You are not welcome here." Scotland was different than I remembered. Rough, cold, Protestant. But it was my kingdom. John Knox, the Protestant reformer, called me Jezebel and preached that women had no right to rule. Imagine, I returned as a Catholic queen to a country where I was considered a devil, but I was determined to prove that I could rule better than any man. At first, I succeeded. I was tolerant of Protestantism. I had wise advisors. The people gradually accepted me. I might have succeeded in building a strong, united Scotland. But then, I made the fatal mistake of falling in love again. Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. Tall, slender, with an angelic face and golden hair. When I met him in 1565, I instantly fell in love. It was a passionate, blinding love that took my mind. My advisors warned me. Your Majesty, Darnley is immature, arrogant, unworthy. But I didn't listen to them. Love is blind, and I was completely blind. I married him against all protestations. We were happy at first. Darnley was a charming, witty, passionate lover, but I soon discovered his dark side. He was jealous, violent, alcoholic. He wanted the royal crown, not just the title of husband to the queen. The worst was when he started to hate my secretary, David Riccio. David was a talented Italian musician, my confidant and friend. Darnley thought he was my lover, which was not true, but jealousy blinded him. March 9th, 1566, a night that marked me forever. I was 6 months pregnant, having dinner with David and some friends. Suddenly the door flew open and Darnley burst in with a group of armed men. They pulled David from my presence, even as he clung convulsively to my skirts. I heard his screams, then silence. We found him dead on the stairs, stabbed 56 times. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, on the floor, on my clothes. I was shocked, traumatized, broken. On June 19th, 1566, I gave birth to my son Jacob, the future king of Scotland and England. I should have been happy, but I wasn't. My marriage to Darnley was in ruins, the trust between us forever shattered. Darnley's behavior grew worse and worse, drinking, arguing with me, threatening me. Sometimes I hated him so much I wished he'd go away, but I never wished for his death. I swear it before God. In that dark time, I found comfort in James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. He was the very opposite of Darnley, a strong, decisive, experienced man. Where Darnley was handsome but weak, Bothwell was tough but dependable. Bothwell became my protector. He protected me from Darnley's outbursts, helped me govern, was my support in my most difficult moments. Gradually, protection became tenderness, tenderness became passion. I knew it was dangerous. Bothwell was married, and so was I. But after all the betrayals and disappointments, I needed to feel truly loved and protected. In his arms, I could forget all my worries. People started talking. They said Bothwell was my lover, that we were planning Darnley's death together. Maybe it was true about the first thing, but we weren't planning murder, or so I tell myself. February 9th and 10th, 1567, the night that ruined my life. Darnley was recovering from smallpox at Kirk O'Field's house in Edinburgh. I visited him in the evening, behaved kindly, even gave him a ring. It was my last-ditch effort to save our marriage. Around midnight, I left for my maid's wedding. Darnley was alone in the house with only a few servants. Around 2 a.m., Edinburgh was rocked by a huge explosion. Kirk O'Field was razed to the ground. When we arrived on the scene, we found Darnley's body in the garden, not destroyed by the blast, but strangled. Next to him lay the body of his servant. Someone had murdered them before the blast. I was shocked. My husband was dead, murdered by unknown killers. Everyone looked at me suspiciously. Who had reason to kill him? They asked. And they all knew the answer. Me and Bothwell. Bothwell was charged with murder, but the court acquitted him. There was no evidence against him, or it was suppressed. I don't know whether he killed Darnley or someone else. Perhaps it was the Scottish lords who hated him as a foreigner. But the world didn't believe me. It believed I was an accessory to the murder of my own husband. Perhaps I was, not directly, but by my love for Bothwell, my hatred for Darnley. I felt guilty, even though I might not have been. 3 months after Darnley's death, the thing happened that finally destroyed me. On April 24, 1567, Bothwell kidnapped me on his way out of Edinburgh. I say kidnapped in quotation marks because I may have agreed to it. I no longer know what was truth and what was theater. Bothwell took me to Dunbar Castle, where we spent 10 days. He told me he loved me, that he would protect me from all enemies, that together we would make a strong Scotland. I believed him, or wanted to believe myself. On May 15, 1567, I married Bothwell in a Protestant ceremony. It was my 3rd wedding and the shortest. It lasted only a few minutes. The bride in a black dress, the groom in armor. It wasn't wedding bells. It was the edge of war. The Scottish lords immediately rebelled. They considered me a murderer and a harlot. They raised an army against us with a banner bearing the dead Darnley and my son with the inscription, "Judge me, Lord, and avenge my wrong." June 15th, 1567, Battle of Carberry Hill. Our armies faced each other, but there was no fighting. My soldiers gradually crossed over to the enemy. Bothwell saw it was over and fled. It was our last goodbye. We couldn't even say goodbye to each other. I never saw him again. He died 10 years later in a Danish prison like a madman, chained to the wall. Sometimes I think we were both cursed, doomed to love and destroy each other. After Carberry Hill, I was taken to Edinburgh as a prisoner. The crowd shouted at me, "Burn the harlot, kill the murderess." Women who once loved me were now throwing stones at me. I felt like Jesus on the road to Golgotha. I was taken to the island of Lochleven, where I was held prisoner. I was sick, exhausted, broken. On July 24th, 1567, they forced me to abdicate in favor of my 1-year-old son, Jacob. My own hand signed the end of my royal dream. I spent 11 months at Lochleven. I was depressed, I cried often, sometimes I wanted to die. But deep in my heart, a spark of hope still burned. I was still Mary Stuart. May 2nd, 1568, my dramatic escape. Young George Douglas fell in love with me and helped me escape. Disguised as a maid, I left the island in a small boat. I felt free again, alive again. I immediately began to gather my faithful. I still had support among the Catholics and some of the lords. 13 May 1568, Battle of Langside. It was my last chance to regain the throne, but I lost. I was faced with a decision: return to France or seek refuge with Elizabeth I in England. I naively believed my cousin would help me. After all, we are both queens, both women in a man's world. How wrong I was. When I crossed the English border on May 16th, 1568, I entered a golden cage from which I would never escape. 19 years, 19 of the best years of my life were spent as a protected guest in English castles. Tutbury, Sheffield Castle, Chartley, Fotheringhay. All these places became my prisons, adorned with silk and gold. Elizabeth I was as clever as a snake. She couldn't kill me without a reason, because I was the anointed queen. But she also couldn't free me because the English Catholics considered me the legitimate heir to the English throne. I was too dangerous to be free, too royal to die. The years passed as slowly as honey. I took up embroidery. I embroidered hundreds of pieces, each with a hidden message. I read, wrote letters, prayed. My world had shrunk to a few chambers and a small garden. My faithful were constantly trying to conspire. Ridolfi's plot, Throckmorton's plot, Babington's plot, all were exposed by Walsingham's spies. Every failed plot has tightened the noose around my neck. The most painful was that my son Jacob grew up a Protestant king of Scotland and showed no interest in his Catholic mother. I wrote him letters, sent him gifts, but he barely responded. I lost not only my freedom, but my mother's love. Gradually, I lost hope. One by one, my friends died or forgot me. The world moved on, but I remained trapped in the past. Sometimes I thought it was my punishment for the sins of my youth. 1586, the year that sealed my fate. Anthony Babington and his conspirators wanted to kill Elizabeth and put me on the English throne. It was a bold but desperate plan, and I was drawn into it like a fly into a spider's web. Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster, let the plot ripen like fruit. He was checking our correspondence, reading every word, waiting for the moment when he could accuse me of treason. And I gave him that opportunity. I wrote letters to Babington agreeing to a plan for liberation. I didn't mention Elizabeth's murder directly, but my approval of the whole plan was clear. It was my greatest mistake, or perhaps the necessary step of a desperate woman. In August 1586, all the conspirators were arrested. Babington and his friends were executed in the most cruel manner, hanged, disemboweled alive, dismembered. I waited my turn. In October 1586, I stood trial at Fotheringhay. I refused to accept his jurisdiction. I was an anointed queen and could not be tried by mortals. But it was futile. The verdict was clear: death. Elizabeth hesitated to sign my death warrant. She knew she would set a dangerous precedent by executing the crowned queen. But she finally succumbed to pressure from her advisors. On February 1st, 1587, she signed my death warrant. February 7th, 1587, evening, my last night on earth. I have just been told that I will be executed tomorrow morning. Strange, but I felt more relief than fear. Finally, all the suffering would be over. I spent the night writing my last letters. I wrote to my son Jacob. My son, be a good king, and remember your mother who loved you more than life. I don't know if he ever got the letter. I prayed all night. I asked God to forgive me of my sins, and there were many. Darnley's murder, infidelity, pride, anger. But I also asked for the strength to die with dignity, like a queen. In the morning, I dressed carefully. A black velvet dress with red lining, the color of martyrs, a white veil on my head, a gold cross around my neck. I was ready to die a Catholic queen and a martyr. My maids wept, Jane Kennedy and Elizabeth Curl, who had spent long years in prison with me. I comforted them. Don't cry, my dears. I'm going to a better world where there will be no more suffering. When I heard the footsteps of the guards, my heart skipped a beat. But it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. I would be free at last. Death was my last escape from the English cage. February 8th, 1587, 10 a.m., the moment of my death. I entered the great hall of Fotheringhay Castle, where 300 people were waiting. The execution block, the executioner with the axe, curious onlookers. It was my last performance. My death sentence was read. I listened calmly, without emotion. Then I prayed, in Latin, which upset some people. But I was Catholic, and as a Catholic, I wanted to die. My maids helped me take off my black dress. Underneath, I wore a red shirt, the color of blood, the color of martyrdom. The audience whispered in surprise. Even in death, I was dramatic. I knelt at the execution block and laid my head. In manus tuas, Domine, into your hands, Lord, were my last words. The executioner raised his axe. The first blow cut the back of my head, but it didn't kill me. The second blow nearly severed my head, but I was still alive. Only the third blow finished the job. I was 44 years old. When the executioner lifted my head, the final humiliation happened. My wig slipped off, revealing my thinning gray hair. I was no longer the beautiful Mary Stuart, but a tired old woman. But I died a queen. My life has been one long story of love and loss. I loved 3 men, Francis, who died young, Darnley, who betrayed me, and Bothwell, who destroyed me. Each love cost me something, and in the end it cost me my life. I was queen of 3 kingdoms, but I died a prisoner. I had everything, beauty, power, wealth, but I lost what was most important, freedom and happiness. Perhaps I was too trusting, too passionate, too human to be a good queen, but they didn't break me. To the end, I remained Mary Stuart, by the grace of God, Queen of Scotland. My death shook Europe and, ironically, paved the way for my son James to the English throne. Perhaps that was my greatest triumph. Don't forget to subscribe to an Echo of the Past channel and give a like if you were moved by my tragic story. History is full of women who loved too much and paid the ultimate price. The past whispers, the future listens.